Okay, so there's a couple things going on. I don't know what video to make, so just various things, conversations going on. Okay, first, a while ago, Rational Emotive sort of challenged me. I think he was trying to move in when, when the guy's down a little bit, but I'm not down. But because see, I had that thing about the mathematics, which I'll explain in a minute. But basically, he says, and no offense taken, but he is accusing me of doing something uh, analogous to writing a what if historical fiction novel with mathematics. He doesn't like that. Does not appreciate it. Well, okay. I think a little bit. I don't know why you think you think that, but I feel somewhat you got to assume because I had to retreat before one time when I made a mathematical when I played around with mathematics and normal philosophy. And in that case, I said, let's imagine that we lived in a mathematically ideal universe. And with that assumption, I drew conclusions that did not stand up to that assumption. But that's a pretty arbitrary assumption. And all I was really drawing attention to that is something that I still feel, deserves attention, which is the fact that you cannot represent, uh, irrational numbers with a finite number of rational numbers. And, to me, there's something concrete, and this is maybe an intuition of mine, but about a number that can be specified in a finite way. There's lots of issues with even those so-called finite numbers and their application to the real world, which is why I said, well, let's just assume that there's a mathematical universe. So you could get those numbers exactly. And I was saying that in some sense you couldn't get square root of 2 exactly, and that there was no measure to get it, no practical measure. Using relationships. And of course I was wrong because there's geometrical relationships. So, but I still think that it's somewhat interesting, this fact that, it takes an infinite number of digits as far as, in any base that is a rational base. And then similarly for transcendental numbers, not even being expressible as irrational numbers. I think it's interesting, And, um, and yet in the video that Rational Emotive was talking about, I did neither of those things. I said mathematics can have its concept of zero, but the thing is that zero, the mathematical zero, is just one of the candidates and suggestions for nothingness. It's an idea. And my point is we can't obtain that idea. All ideas are meant and specified in relation to other ideas, and if you include perceptions as ideas, and nothing is not different in that respect. But since it's supposed to represent nothing, we forget that it has the properties and that it's really relative to something. What do we use when we try to imagine nothing? We use, blackness and, darkness and silence. We use blank canvases. Our senses could be said to have a pigmentation, which is these perceptions as we normally think of them. But then there's also the canvas, the space upon which these pigments can be applied, right? So we use for nothingness, as an idea of nothingness, we draw a metaphor from a blank canvas, a blank canvas. And the blank canvas isn't really nothing. It's a decent metaphor of nothing, and it does all the jobs that the concept of nothing does for us. It allows the ideas of potential, right? It allows the ideas of memory, you know. Um, so another thing that's talking about is that the number 1 is older than the number 0. The concept of 1 is older than the concept of 0. Now, not the real material thing. Who knows about that? I'm just saying in the history of man, as far as I know, and there's a couple examples, I believe, culturally, if I recall correctly, but I'm no expert in that. If somebody else wants to tell me different in some culture or remind me when negative numbers come in, that would be interesting, because I see this as like our brain is built to recognize one and many. We get this total mishmash of colors and information overload, and we manage to find patterns we want to identify. We have one and many built into the circuitry. Zero is a little more clever. It's a little more new, and it's the idea, because in the old days, if there was, if something wasn't there, then it just didn't matter. It wasn't a part of the, why you bring it up? But of course, it's more subtle to realize, hey, even if something isn't there, it might be worth noting that it's not there. And especially if, maybe there's 0 apples and I'm an apple seller, so it's relevant. 0 can be relevant. And it's funny how something that in one perspective can be so obvious is hard to put words on. No doubt people knew when they had nothing, but they just dealt with it as a special case instead of just as a number that happened to be 0. So yeah, there was something else, but I don't think it's 5, 6 minute video. Cheers.